Welcome everyone to another amazing episode of Wellness Warriors, sponsored by BreastCancerConqueror.com. I'm Dr. Veronique Desonier, better known as Dr. V, and founder of BreastCancerConqueror.com and the 7 Essential System. And of course, I have to do a shout out launching the second edition of my new book, Heal Breast Cancer Naturally. And very excited to have that out. So if you want to check it out on Amazon, make sure you do so. But today I'm very excited about my guest. His name is Alex Swanson. He's the founder of Nutrition Genome and creator of the software Genetrition. Now, for those of you who know me, have followed me, read my blogs, if you're clients, you know that I've recommended the Nutrition Genome test to you because it takes the confusion out of what you should eat to support yourself as you're going on a preventative journey or a healing journey. This test is incredible. Alex is the creator of it. He's also a second-generation nutritionist and co-owner of Swanson Health Center, not as in Swanson Vitamins, but a health center specifically. He's been in this business for over 40 years, and he has some amazing background. He has a post-bac in nutritional sciences, in applied nutrition. He has a certificate in methylation and clinical nutrigenomics, which that is so important now as we, dig deeper into our epigenetics and nutrigenomics, and also a certificate in genetics and genomics from Stanford University. So welcome, Alex. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with my audience.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited. We've got some great information and we've got a special bonus for you. So listen to the end so you can take advantage of that. So tell me a little bit about why you started the Nutrition Genome test.
So during my time in clinical practice, about 6 years ago now, I started bringing in genetics and genetic testing. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of information in terms of how to utilize it. There was a lot of fear actually around the results and what to do with them.
Confusion, yeah.
A lot of confusion. And so I started kind of compiling a database of all the research I could find and then applying that with these genetic tests, because a lot of them just kind of gave the genotype, so the variants with not a lot of information behind them. And I started looking at blood work and family history, personal health history, and genetics as kind of this puzzle. And the genetics really helped kind of illuminate these pathways and understanding how certain diseases really do manifest on an individual basis. And it was really just this kind of light bulb moment of one after another. I was finally able to explain things that couldn't be explained. And it was giving people this empowering notion that you were in control essentially of your destiny, that genes weren't this, these are your genes and that's it. And that's what a lot of times people believed. That, it's genetic. You can't do anything about that, whether we're talking about cancer or heart disease or diabetes, all these things. But we've now really understood that through epigenetics, we can change gene expression. We can change the destiny of people's health. And it's a really powerful, thought to know that about yourself and to know that about your health. And so I kind of, after a certain amount of time, realized that doing these by hand was no longer sustainable. It took up to 8 hours per client to really outline it. And it was worth it in the end, but I couldn't keep that pace up. And so I created the software program to cut down on all that work and also help other people, other practitioners utilize it on their own.
Wow, what a gift, because most people know how important genetics are, but they have no clue, how to apply it. So what a beautiful gift. So in dealing specifically with breast cancer, I know just the other day I had a client email me. She said she's so concerned because so many of her friends are getting these prophylactic mastectomies because they're afraid of the BRCA gene. And, we know that's not the solution, but talk to us a little bit about the BRCA genes, because that's one of those things where, women think that if you have that, you're doomed and destined to develop breast cancer.
Right. So the BRCA genes are tumor suppressor genes, meaning they assist in DNA repair. And it's important for people to know that they're just one of many DNA repair genes. There's multiple ones involved. and multiple tumor suppressor genes. And so the idea is that with mutations in the BRCA genes, and I want to point out too that BRCA we don't test those genes in the Nutrition Genome Report. Those need to be done through a practitioner. It's a different type of panel.
Mm-hmm.
But the BRCA genes essentially reduce that ability to repair DNA. And so when people find out that they have these mutations, they need to be more aware of how DNA damage occurs and how they repair it, because you need to incorporate more strategies to help prevent that process. And there are a lot of ways to do that, actually, we're finding out. And so when you understand that BRCA is more sensitive to dioxins, find out where those high loads of dioxins are coming from. They accumulate, they're environmental pollutants that accumulate in animal fat mainly, and dairy is kind of a big source of it. It can be. Folic acid, synthetic folic acid is in fortified foods, in certain supplements. High circulating levels of folic acid have been found to be especially problematic for those with BRCA mutations. It's been linked with breast cancer, high levels of it, but for BRCA it was 3.2 times higher.
Wow.
So you start to look at, okay, what causes the damage, especially with BRCA, and then what improves BRCA. And that would be zinc, selenium, choline, resveratrol. All of those may be in much higher need for certain individuals who have those mutations, and other genes that are kind of pointing towards that, like glutathione genes, for example, in selenium. And choline, for example, PEMT genes. So you start to kind of connect the dots of saying, okay, this is how those dominoes can fall, but this is how you can really prevent that from happening in the first place.
That's amazing. And so, again, to reiterate, for those of you who may not understand this, BRCA genes are good genes. They're tumor suppressor genes, right? And if they are mutated genetically, less than 5% of breast cancers are actually familial, right? And you talked about epigenetically improving the BRCA gene if there is a mutation. There was an interesting study where they fed women, I think it was 1.5 cups of edamame beans, and they were able to see reversal of the BRCA gene mutation just from 1.5 cups of edamame beans. So we see how powerful food can be in reversing these issues. Another concern that women have, especially in our community, is the fact that they're told they have an estrogen or a progesterone positive cancer. Now, how could the Nutrition Genome Report help them support those pathways if they have that type of cancer?
Yes. So with estrogen positive, it's really important to look at the estrogen pathway. And the genes involved in that include FUT2, which has to do with gut, the gut microbiome. And so the idea is that the more diverse your gut flora, the better modulation of estrogen levels. And that can be a huge link just right there alone, is a really diverse diet. And we've seen that with BRCA as well. The more diverse the plant intake, the better the BRCA function and more reduced chance of breast cancer. And then you have genes called MAO, COMT, and liver enzymes CYP1B1, CYP1A1, and CYP1A2. Now, all of those have to do with the metabolism of estrogen. And estrogen can essentially have two fates. It can detoxify well, or it can become a what's called a hydroxylated metabolite and causing DNA damage to the breast tissue. And in that whole pathway, there's all these different factors that basically slow it down, speed it up, or create more carcinogenic reactions. And the three big ones to remember for this pathway are iodine, vitamin D, and omega-3s. And if you dig into the research, those three are the big ones for preventing breast cancer.
Yeah. Awesome. So now you understand why I keep telling you to take those supplements and make sure you're at the proper level. All right. And what about MTHFR? That's kind of the hot topic. How does that play in with breast cancer?
So the studies on folate have been conflicting in terms of whether or not it prevents breast cancer. And a lot of times they find it's people who have a higher alcohol intake. That's where folate is really helpful in protecting a little bit more. But as a general healthy person, it's conflicting. What we do know, though, is that MTHFR creates a higher need for folate in the diet. And there are a few genes there. There's MTHFR, there's MTHFR, FD1, and there's DHFR. And the important thing to understand about the genetic testing on this side of things is how do you metabolize folic acid? That's really the big one, because if you don't break that down well, that can bottleneck and therefore kind of create this traffic jam in the folate cycle. And that's where you're going to have more issues with DNA damage. And so for people who have, are supplementing with folic acid, a lot of fortified foods with folic acid, they have those high levels in there, that's where it can really become a problem.
And even supplements. I'm surprised. I look at some so-called natural supplements that our clients are taking, and it's like folic acid. It's like, really?
Yeah. It's the research on it. It keeps coming out more and more. They've seen higher levels for those with autism, as well, and the mother. And so I think we're seeing DNA damage caused by these high circulating levels of folic acid.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about also an example of negative and positive gene expression for breast health and how our diet can affect that.
Yeah, sure. So there's numerous factors as well, as you know. I mean, there are just so many variables on each individual case. It can be difficult to know which ones are the most important. And that's where I feel like the nutrigenomic testing is extremely beneficial, because it helps narrow down that list. Because if you're looking at all of the risk factors involved in breast cancer, it can be pretty overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And you want to be able to narrow down what's the most important thing for you. If you have a history of breast cancer, that's obviously a big one to start looking at, and what type. Oral contraceptive use, it's been a really long period of time, that can induce very many deficiencies in vitamins and minerals that protect the breast tissue. Having a child late in the 30s, the first child in the late 30s is another risk factor. And so you start to look at these and saying, how can I reduce these? Because all of these are essentially accumulated DNA damage. And you want to look at, okay, the choline genes, for example. Do you have a much higher need for choline as a female? Because that's going to help with that detoxification. It's going to help with the protection of the breast tissue. It's going to help with anxiety as well, and it's going to help with sleep. All of those things are extremely important. The same is going to be as selenium. If your selenium needs are high and your glutathione is low, you're going to have less protection against the things that we come across on a day-to-day basis. And interesting enough, when I was doing these individual reports, and I'd see that, and I'd see breast cancer in the family, you start to think, okay, how much choline is this person getting? How much selenium? And you realize and zinc is another one, extremely low a lot of the times. And these are some of the most important ones. But seafood has dropped off for the most part. Some people don't eat egg yolks or eat eggs at all. And if they're just eating lean chicken breast, they're not really getting much choline in their diet. And so the really fascinating thing about this is when people are reviewing the results, you need to understand that this isn't something wrong with your body why you're requiring more of this. This is telling a history of your collective ancestral experience, essentially where your ancestors lived, what they ate, what they experienced. That's who you are today. And when we find out we have a low conversion of ALA to EPA and DHA from plants, or beta carotene to vitamin A, or these higher needs for vitamin D, this has to do with our migration pathways. And so where we're in more plant-based place or more animal-based place. When you look at the Inuit, it's a fascinating example of an isolated society of an environment and diet that has changed their entire genetics. And so they have a deleted allele in the omega-3 pathway for plant-based omegas to animal-based. They can't convert it at all because they've always had seafood. They never had plants. So that's a really, I think, important understanding of these results, knowing that this is telling a story. There's nothing wrong with your body. It's telling a story. And understanding that story helps you make those decisions for the future generations too.
I love that. I love that history behind it, collective history. And I know I learned the hard way. I was told, I'm a kind of a health detective, always researching the latest and greatest, and I was always a proponent of omega-3s and fish oils. Well, this doctor said, no, fish oils are toxic. You need to just do plant seed oils or seed oils. So I said, okay, that makes sense. I'll try that. Went on seed oils, and then I tested my lipids and my, EPA, DHA. like almost nothing. So I'm not a converter, which, you know, of course, with the Nutrition Genome found out and other genetic testing. So it's so important. You know, you don't have to guess when it comes to your health and what you're eating. There's so many tools available now to make it a lot easier for you and to support the pathways that need supporting. Now, what about allergy testing? You know, so somebody gets an allergy test and they say, you know, you can't eat eggs and you're allergic to gluten and, you know, blah, 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 blah. How does that coincide, or does it at all, with the Nutrition Genome test?
So allergies essentially are an alteration of the microbiome. And so your genetic test is your blueprint from birth on. It doesn't change, but your microbiome is constantly changing. And allergies typically will not show up in a genetic report because that is some kind of alteration that has changed. That's a question actually we get quite a bit. We get a lot of questions with gluten, for example. And the problem is again, it's a very low percentage that's actually genetic and celiac. In terms of gluten sensitivity, there has been a change that's occurred. The story I always give is from my dad, who ate wheat his whole life and eggs and had to do a round of pretty aggressive antibiotics. And after that round of antibiotics, every time he'd eat eggs or he'd eat wheat, his forehead would break out. And he all of a sudden had leaky gut. You know, after his whole life being fine, had an issue now. And so, yeah, that is a separate issue on its own.
Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. Let's talk about inflammation in general. We know that inflammation is a precursor to so many diseases, including breast cancer. So talk to us a little bit about how the nutrition genome testing or genetic testing in general can help us look at our inflammatory patterns.
Yes, so there's a whole section that is for inflammation in the Nutrition Genome Report, and it looks at your cell membranes, the mitochondrial health, and glutathione. So everything that's protecting your cells. And so what it can kind of help you figure out is, where do you need more protection? Where do you need more input? Which compounds are more important for you to encourage healthy cell growth and prevent cancerous growth? And the glutathione genes are a major one. There's ones that are particular to the breast tissue. But I think anything that's protecting the mitochondria, for those who have a higher sensitivity to that inflammation, they need to fortify those cell membranes a lot more. And that's actually where choline comes in too. Choline's a major building block of that protective layer around your mitochondria. And I think that's something that's been deficient in women for a long time now.
And what kind of food sources, where would we get choline? I know we can, like phosphatidylcholine as a supplement.
Yeah, you can supplement with it. The biggest source would be eggs. That's the highest source of choline.
Okay.
You're going to find it in fish eggs as well, with combines with DHA and choline, making it a true superfood.
As in caviar? Like caviar?
As in caviar.
Okay.
Salmon eggs are excellent. You're also going to find it in certain cuts of meat compared to others. So you're going to find it in the thigh meat of chicken versus the breast, for example. It's higher in wild meat than it is in domestic. And you're going to find it in smaller amounts in certain plants and nuts and seeds as well. Okay,
great. And what kinds of foods or activities can we do to improve our glutathione production? Because glutathione, well, talk to us about glutathione and how important it is.
Sure. So glutathione is your master antioxidant system. So it's essentially what is really protecting you from all of these chemical assaults. And they found in research that those who live the longest have the highest glutathione. And glutathione precursors include selenium and a certain amount of amino acids that are found in broth, for example. So homemade broth is a very powerful glutathione increasing agent in that respect. Exposure to the cold, believe it or not, is an amazing way to improve glutathione levels. So those,
really?
Yeah. So people who are in colder climates that kind of get that exposure actually get a little bit more of a glutathione boost.
I thought living in Florida was better for me.
And it depends,
There's benefits, yeah.
There's benefits both ways. Yeah. But I mean, they looked at it with cryotherapy or, even just winter kayakers, had higher glutathione levels, because it's essentially a little bit of a stressor increases that glutathione.
Interesting.
But selenium is really the major one that I think is doing the most work. It's the heavy lifter. And you're going to find that mostly in seafood. And it ranges based on the soil all around the world. So it depends on how high it is, and the food depends on the soil.
And when it comes to selenium supplementation, there's two types of seleniums, one that's not recommended, one that is better absorbed. Can you talk on that?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the selenomethionine is one of the best sources of it. I'm trying to think of the one that has not really fared as well. I can't think of it. Maybe you know
selenite, it. Yeah, selenite salts.
Selenite, yes, that's it. Yeah, that one has not been that effective. So I think supplementing with it for many people is a good idea.
Yeah, especially if you want to be preventative. Now, overall, when you look at, your nutrition genome test, what can people walk away from? So they get the test done and they get this lengthy report. What's the big takeaway, and what's the advantage to doing the test for them?
The advantage would be, so the first few pages are essentially the snapshot of your entire report. Your whole report is about 50 pages. It's a book on you, is what we say. And in the very beginning, you'll see your strengths and weaknesses. So your genetic strengths and your genetic weaknesses, essentially how to turn those weaknesses into strengths. You'll see a custom grocery list. So that is specific to each person in terms of where their higher needs are. You'll see your additives, chemicals, toxins that you're going to be more sensitive to based on the genetic results. And so you're going to be more conscious of avoiding those when you can. And then recommended blood work. And that part is not to say that these are going to be out of range, but that these may be important markers for you to follow. And one of those would be, that stood out to me about breast cancer, is the Hfe genes, which are for iron levels. So hemochromatosis, which comes from mainly the British Isles, where that mutation occurred. And the idea on that was it enabled more pregnancies. In that cold, damp weather, you go through a lot of iron stores. And it was essentially a low iron environment from a dietary standpoint. So that was an adaptation to that climate. But when we brought people out of that climate and into places where iron is everywhere, you started cooking with cast iron, it became deleterious. It became an issue. So high iron levels are something really to look out for with breast cancer, with people of Irish heritage especially.
Interesting. And then high serum ferritin also. You have to be very careful with that as well.
Yeah. So the genetics can help you kind of point towards, is this something I need to monitor?
Okay, excellent. Well, I know I did mine several months ago and I've really enjoyed it, gleaned a lot of information, and was right on with so many other things that I've been doing and researching as well. So you have a special gift for our listeners. I'm really excited about that. You want to tell us about that?
Yes. So we are offering a 10% coupon code for all of your listeners when they check out. You just used BCC as the coupon code, and it will automatically deduct it. And yeah, if you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to answer anything.
Awesome. So that's short for Breast Cancer Conqueror. So B as in boy, C as in cat, C as in cat, and you'll get a 10% discount on the Nutrition Genome test. So I really encourage you to get that done, because one thing I hear all the time is, what's the best anti-cancer diet and which is the best diet? And, unfortunately, I've gotten into, food fights with people. Some people say it's only plant-based, that's the only way. Others are saying, no, it's got to be keto, and I've done them all, so you have to do what is best for your body and your genetics. Oh, I have another question that popped into my head. Blood type diet. So I used to be an adamant follower of the blood type diet, years and years ago. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so the blood type diet is, in my opinion, it's challenging in the fact that there's so many mixed blood types now, and that it's really changed over the years. I think there's some really interesting information on it and some things that are useful, but I also wonder, is this always true? Because when I did it, it basically said I should be a vegetarian, and I did not do well without enough protein. I felt awful. And when I did my genetics, it kind of showed the opposite, where I'm really come from more of this cold mountainous environment that required more of that kind of diet. And I thrive on that. And so that was where I saw the challenge, but I know some people that seem to really feel like it's helpful.
Yeah, I swore by it for many, many years. I'm an O blood type and, needed the protein, hunter-gatherer type of thing. But, the more people I worked with, the more kind of contradictions I saw. And especially now that we understand more about genetic testing, I think it's okay, but it's kind of passé. So
Right. Yeah.
we have much better information now.
Oh, well, thank you.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I know this kind of testing is really going to change a lot of lives, and really appreciate all that you've done to support people out there.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.